Appendix: The Moral Practice of Science and Medicine, Bioethics. Many members of the general public are excited about the potential of advances in biomedical research to prevent or cure terrible diseases, but are also anxious about whether these new technologies are leading us into dangerous territory. The discipline that considers the morality of applications of biotechnology and medicine to humanity is called bioethics. In this appendix, we will consider a sample of some of the bioethical dilemmas that are inspiring significant debate today, though this is by no means an exhaustive list. I will focus particularly on advances that are arising from the rapid progress in understanding the human genome. Medical genetics. Some years ago, a young woman came to the oncology clinic at the University of Michigan on a desperate mission. It was the day that I realized a real revolution in genetic medicine was beginning. She and I were brought together by a tangled set of circumstances involving a close-knit family, a terrible disease, and the leading edge of research on the human genome. Susan, not her real name, and her family lived under a cloud. First, her mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer, then her aunt, then two of her aunt's children, and then Susan's oldest sister. Deeply alarmed, Susan was careful to examine herself and obtain regular mammograms while watching her sister ultimately lose her battle. One of Susan's cousins elected to undergo a prophylactic double mastectomy in hopes of avoiding the same fate. Then Susan's remaining sister, Janet, found a lump, and it too proved to be cancer. Meanwhile, my physician colleague Barbara Weber and I had initiated a project in Michigan to try to identify hereditary factors in breast cancer. Susan's family enrolled in the study and were known to me only as Family 15. But by one of those strange coincidences, when Janet came for counseling about her new diagnosis of breast cancer, it was Dr. Weber who saw her in the clinic, heard about the family history, and realized the connection. Susan's desperate mission a few months later was to see whether Dr. Weber and I had any further information from the research study that would dissuade her from proceeding with a double mastectomy. No longer able to be optimistic, she had scheduled this drastic procedure to take place in 3 days. The timing of her visit was exquisite. Work done in our laboratory over the preceding weeks had demonstrated that there was an extremely high likelihood that members of Susan's family were in fact carrying a dangerous mutation in a gene, now known as BRCA1, on chromosome 17. We had started the study with little expectation that such important clinical applications could occur so quickly. Now, however, faced with an urgent situation, Dr. Weber and I agreed it would be unethical to withhold information at a time where it had such obvious relevance. Going back to the lab and poring over the data made it immediately clear that Susan did not inherit the dangerous mutation that her mother and her two sisters carried, and therefore her risk of breast cancer was no higher than the average woman's. On that day, Susan became the first person on Earth to receive information about her BRCA1 status. Her reaction was a mix of elation and disbelief. She canceled the surgery. Word spread through her family like wildfire, and the phone began ringing off the hook. Within a few weeks, Dr. Weber and I found ourselves counseling her large extended family, all of whom wished to know their status. There were many additional dramatic moments. The cousin, who had had the double mastectomy years before, turned out not to carry the dangerous mutation after all. Initially stunned when told of this result, she ultimately came to peace with it, concluding that she had made the best choice she could at the time that she had decided to have the surgery. Perhaps most dramatic were the consequences for another branch of the family, who had previously thought that they were at no increased risk for breast cancer since they were related through their father to the affected women. The idea that a susceptibility gene for breast cancer could be transmitted by unaffected males had not seemed plausible, but that's how the BRCA1 gene works. In fact, it turned out that their father carried the mutation and had passed this on to 5 of his 10 children. One of them, age 39, was stunned by the news that she might be at risk. She wanted to know her DNA results. It was positive. She immediately asked for a mammogram to be performed, and that same day learned that she had breast cancer. The good news was that the tumor was very small and would probably not otherwise have been diagnosed for another 2 or 3 years, at which point the prognosis might not have been nearly so encouraging. All told, 35 members of this single family were found to be at risk. About half of them turned out to carry the dangerous mutation, and half of those were women. Women who carry this gene are at risk for both breast and ovarian cancer. The medical and psychological consequences have been profound. Even Susan, who escaped the curse, went through a prolonged period of depression and a sense of alienation from her family, experiencing what is known as survivor guilt, named after those who lived through the Holocaust. Susan's family was admittedly unusual. Most breast cancer has hereditary contributions, but not nearly as strong as in her family. But there are no perfect specimens among us. The universal presence of mutations in DNA, the price we pay for evolution, means that no one can claim bodily perfection any more than spiritual perfection. The time is coming soon when the genetic glitches that place each of us at risk for some future illness will be discovered, and we may each have an opportunity, as Susan's family did, to find out what's hiding within our own DNA instruction book. As we begin to look at the consequences of these rapid advances in understanding human biology, ethical questions arise, and well they should. Knowledge itself has no intrinsic moral value. It is the way in which that knowledge is put to use that acquires an ethical dimension. This principle should be familiar from many non-medical applications in daily experience. For example, certain mixtures of chemicals can generate a colorful fireworks display that will brighten our skies and lift our spirits at a time of celebration. The same mixture can be used, however, to fire a projectile or make a bomb that kills dozens of innocent civilians. There are compelling reasons to celebrate the outpouring of scientific advances that arise from the Human Genome Project. After all, in virtually every culture throughout history, the alleviation of suffering from medical illness has been considered a good thing, perhaps even an ethical mandate. Thus, while some might argue that science is moving too quickly, and that we should declare a moratorium on certain applications until we have time to study them ethically, I find those arguments difficult to convey to parents who are desperate to help an ailing child. Would not intentional restrictions on the progress of life-saving science simply to allow ethics to catch up be themselves unethical?